When the letter first arrived, Keran thought it was a scam. A 900-acre lake ranch, inheriting it from an uncle she barely remembered. It sounded impossible. But when she drove out to the property, a glittering stretch of blue water framed by rolling green hills, she realized it was all real. The ranch had once belonged to her late Uncle Raymond, a quiet man who'd made a fortune selling cattle and land. He had no children, and after his passing, the will named her, the only living relative who had ever written to him, as the sole heir. Keran stood by the lake that first morning, her reflection rippling in the glassy surface. The air smelled like pine and clean water. The wind hummed through the tall grass. "This is mine," she whispered, still not believing it. But ownership wasn't as simple as signing papers. The ranch came with debts, old loans, unpaid taxes, and legal tangles over the lake's water rights. The lawyer who handled the will, Mr. Collins, warned her that keeping the ranch would take work and money. "Or you could sell," he said. "Developers have made offers before." Keran shook her head. "No, this is my family's land. I'm keeping it." That decision changed everything. Over the next few months, Keran poured her savings into restoring the ranch. She hired workers to clear the overgrown trails and repair the old docks. She found her uncle's notebooks filled with plans for a lakeside mansion, a project he'd dreamed about but never finished. So she built it. The mansion rose on the northern shore, its glass walls overlooking the still water. Locals came to watch, whispering rumors that she'd found buried money or struck oil under the lake. Some called her ambitious. Others called her foolish. By the time the house was finished, the bills were towering. Keran took out loans, promising herself she'd pay them off once the ranch started turning a profit. She hosted lake festivals, rented cabins, even allowed fishing tournaments. But the money wasn't enough. One stormy night, as rain pounded the mansion's windows, 2 men from the county arrived with papers. They weren't guests. They were investigators. "Keran Rayner?" one asked. "We need to ask about the construction permits and the funding behind this property." Keran's heart froze. She had signed everything herself, including forms she hadn't fully read. What could possibly be wrong? The next morning, news spread across town. Keran Rayner was under investigation for fraud and environmental violations. The mansion that once symbolized her dream was now evidence in a case that could cost her everything. Keran didn't sleep after the investigators left. She sat at the long kitchen table of the mansion, staring at the paperwork spread before her like a bad puzzle. Permits, environmental impact reports, loan agreements. Everything had her signature, but not everything had been properly approved. By sunrise, the lake looked different to her. What once felt peaceful now seemed watchful, as if the water itself knew what was coming. Mr. Collins arrived later that morning, his usual calm replaced by a tight frown. "Keran," he said, lowering his voice, "the county claims the mansion was built too close to protected wetlands. They're saying runoff from construction may have damaged the lake ecosystem." "That's impossible," she snapped. "I followed the plans Uncle Raymond left." "That may be the problem," he replied gently. "Those plans were never legally updated." Within weeks, the investigation escalated. Inspectors tested the water. Surveyors measured property lines. Bank representatives demanded meetings. Every knock on the mansion door sent Keran's heart racing. The local news picked up the story, painting her as a reckless heiress who ignored the law to live in luxury. Headlines questioned where her funding came from and whether she had falsified documents to secure loans. Keran felt trapped inside her own home, blinds drawn, phone buzzing non-stop with calls she didn't answer. The truth was messier than the rumors. Keran hadn't intended to break any laws, but desperation had pushed her to cut corners. When one contractor suggested handling permits later, she agreed. When a banker overlooked missing approvals in exchange for faster paperwork, she didn't ask questions. Now those choices were catching up with her. The county froze all activity on the ranch. Fishing events were canceled. Cabin rentals vanished overnight. Without income, loan payments piled up. Keran sold her car, then her jewelry, then even some of the ranch equipment. But it wasn't enough. One afternoon, she was formally charged. Fraud, environmental negligence, false reporting. The maximum sentence, 10 years in prison. Keran stood in the courtroom, hands trembling as the judge read the charges. She glanced back at the gallery and saw familiar faces, neighbors, former employees, people who once admired her. Some looked angry, others looked disappointed. As she was released on bail, reporters swarmed her. "Did greed drive you to break the law?" one shouted. "Do you regret building the mansion?" another asked. Keran said nothing. That night, alone in the massive house, she wandered through empty rooms. The mansion echoed with every step, no longer a symbol of success but a monument to her mistakes. She stopped at the window overlooking the lake and finally allowed herself to cry. She had inherited land, but also responsibility she hadn't fully understood. And now she was fighting not just to save the ranch, but to save her future. The trial began in early spring, when the lake thawed and reporters returned like migrating birds. Satellite trucks lined the courthouse steps, broadcasting Keran's face across the state. She barely recognized herself on the screens, pale, exhausted, and frightened. Her new attorney, Maria Delgado, was blunt from the start. "This case isn't about the mansion," Maria said. "It's about responsibility. The prosecution wants to prove you knowingly ignored environmental law for personal gain." "I didn't," Keran insisted. "I just wanted to save the ranch." "That may be true," Maria replied, "but truth has to be proven." Witnesses took the stand one by one. Contractors admitted permits were rushed. A loan officer testified that documents were incomplete when approved. An environmental expert described sediment runoff entering the lake, harming fish populations during construction. Each word felt like a weight pressing on Keran's chest. The prosecution painted her as careless and privileged, someone who inherited wealth and assumed rules didn't apply. They displayed photos of the mansion towering over the water, calling it a symbol of unchecked ambition. When Keran finally testified, her voice shook, but she spoke honestly. She described her uncle, the ranch's history, and her fear of losing everything. "I made mistakes," she said, "but I never meant to harm the lake. This land is my family. I tried to protect it the only way I knew how." For the first time, the courtroom fell silent. Outside the courthouse, opinions were divided. Some locals organized protests demanding prison time. Others, especially longtime ranch families, quietly supported her, arguing the county itself had failed to guide new landowners properly. Then a surprise emerged. Maria uncovered records showing the county had delayed permit reviews for over a year, pushing Keran into financial desperation. Emails revealed inspectors had approved construction verbally, only to later deny it in writing. The defense rested on that evidence. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 long days. Keran waited in a holding room, staring at a crack in the wall, imagining 10 years of her life slipping away, 10 years without the lake, without freedom. When the verdict was read, her knees nearly gave out. Guilty on lesser charges. The judge ruled Keran had acted negligently, not maliciously. Prison time was possible but not guaranteed. Sentencing would be decided in a separate hearing. As she left the courtroom, the lake appeared on the horizon, calm and indifferent. Keran realized something had changed inside her. No matter what happened next, the dream she once chased was gone. All that remained was accountability, and the hope that she could still make things right. The sentencing hearing arrived on a quiet autumn morning. The crowds were smaller now, the cameras fewer, but the weight on Keran's shoulders felt heavier than ever. She wore a simple gray suit, nothing like the elegant dresses she once imagined wearing in her lakeside mansion. The prosecutor argued first. Keran Rayner ignored the law, damaged protected land, and misled financial institutions, he said. If this court does not impose prison time, it sends the message that wealth excuses negligence. Maria stood next, steady and composed. She didn't deny Keran's mistakes. Instead, she told a different story. One of responsibility taken too late, but taken fully. Ms. Rayner has sold the mansion, Maria said. Every dollar went toward environmental restoration and debt repayment. She no longer lives in luxury. She lives with consequences. Keran then addressed the court. She spoke of the lake, how she once saw it as a backdrop for success, not a living system that needed care. She admitted her fear of failure had blinded her judgment. "I accept whatever punishment this court decides," she said quietly, "but if I'm allowed to stay, I will spend my life repairing what I damaged." The judge listened without expression. After a long pause, he delivered the sentence. Keran was spared prison. Instead of 10 years behind bars, she received 10 years of supervised probation, heavy fines, and a court-ordered mandate to oversee lake restoration under state supervision. Any violation would trigger immediate imprisonment. Relief hit her like a wave, but it wasn't joy, it was humility. The mansion was demolished within months. In its place, native trees were replanted along the shoreline. Wetlands slowly returned. Fish populations recovered under careful monitoring. The ranch became a conservation site, rather than a luxury retreat. Keran moved into a small caretaker's cabin on the edge of the property. She worked alongside biologists, volunteers, and former critics. The lake no longer belonged to her, it belonged to the future. Years later, a reporter returned and asked her one final question. "Do you regret inheriting the ranch?" Keran looked across the water, sunlight dancing on its surface. "No," she said, "I regret thinking ownership meant control." The lake remained, vast, quiet, and enduring. And Keran remained too, not as a builder of mansions, but as a guardian who finally understood the cost of inheritance. Enjoying this story about Keran and the 900-acre lake ranch? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life tales of unexpected inheritances and the challenges that come with them. Give this a like if you found it intriguing and drop a comment below. What would you do if you suddenly inherited a property like hers?